Hello, and thank you to all who attended last week's Digital Literacy Symposium held by the Mary and Jeff Bell Library. This is Eric Casio. I am re-recording my presentation for evaluating AI research tools for verifiability as promised. So now for this workshop, we're going to be evaluating the verifiability of the answers and responses that we get when we prompt various AI tools for information, and being able to match the responses that they're giving us with some kind of an external source rather than doing a deep dive into any one tool or its features. So basically what we're going to cover is the concept of hallucinations, these answer engines, which you might hear that term, which we're supposed to hopefully solve the problem of hallucinations, and some overarching issues that have to do with verifiability in these various tools. Bad citations in this context means the links to various outside sources and documents that the AI is providing, which are supposed to be where its response is coming from. And we'll find out that it's not always 100% accurate. There has actually been a lot of very good research into how accurate AI tools are, those that are supposed to be supplying sources for their information, how accurate those sources are and how well they actually support the AI text. There's been some great research done in the fields of computer science and data science. Again, so just to quickly summarize some of the overarching issues that I've come across in the literature, and I will be talking about some specific studies later on, but some of these overarching issues that do crop up in AI tools are the sources linked in the text can possibly be inaccurate. They may not accurately source the claims that the AI tool is making. Sometimes it's difficult to verify, especially if the text is highly abstracted from those source documents. And one of the main issues that for us librarians will probably be important is that it can be unclear how it's choosing the best sources. An AI tool might retrieve, let's say, 10 sources for a prompt for information that I give it, but it's unclear how it's selecting the quote-unquote best resources. And oftentimes the AI response is going to tend to rely more on one or two or just a few sources out of that list. All right, so it's unclear how it's selecting the best sources. And, but there's always the potential that those sources that it's relying on can be biased or could be otherwise problematic. Maybe they're a little bit too old, or they might not be a primary source, etc. So these are things that we're used to keeping our eye on as librarians. But again, just wanting to tie all this back into the student's perspective, because, ultimately we're here to basically guide students into in the process of doing research. So what I wanted to do during the workshop is to actually have us all go through some of the same search examples, and then as a group go over the responses that we get, some of the issues that we might pick up from those responses, and kind of have a little impromptu brainstorming session about how this could all be presented to students that we work with, perhaps as interactive activities or just as a way to guide them through understanding what some of the limitations of these AI tools might be. Now, obviously, this is a recording, so what I'm going to do is just go over some of the examples that I had shown in class, and you'll also receive my slides. And so you all are free to try any of these activities out, go over my activity examples, and if you have any questions, of course, you could shoot me an email anytime. So just a quick note on what this workshop is unfortunately not going to be, because it would be beyond the scope of what we could feasibly do in an hour. It's not going to be a survey of all the various tools that are out there. It's not going to be an in-depth look at the features of any particular AI tool. I will be showing 3 as an example that have some common functionality that would come in handy for students doing research. That is, of course, Perplexity AI, which is a well-known research tool. It's been around for a couple of years. Microsoft Copilot. So for those of you who have access to a 365 account, you have access to the new Copilot chat feature, which is a generative chat interface similar to ChatGPT. And I will also be using ChatGPT as a research tool. So you may or may not know that very recently, in the past several months or so, ChatGPT, the 4.0 version, now does have the ability to give you sources for the information that it's providing. So you could actually use it now for research, at least in as much as that it could go out and gather sources from the web in order to provide citations and sources to support the information that it's giving you. So I'm going to be focusing on the free versions of those 3 AI tools. Now, as you probably all also know, there are premium versions to virtually any AI tool that's out there. Premium version of ChatGPT, a premium version of Google Gemini. Especially regarding ChatGPT and Google Gemini, you might have heard that with the premium feature, they have something called deep research that is available, which I'm fascinated by, and I want to try it out. I feel like it's going to make their use as research tools maybe even more powerful and efficient than it already is, and hopefully will bring some transparency to how they're actually gathering and selecting sources for us. Again, these are things that we can't evaluate unless we have full access to the premium version. And it's worth noting that, again, as things stand right now, there are some open questions as far as if we're going to be utilizing AI tools of any sort in our classes. Our students, as of right now, at least at this university, would have access only to the free version. All right, so I think that's enough for me just talking for now. Again, this was supposed to be an interactive hands-on workshop, and again, I do apologize. I think this is around the point where the first time was that I lost the Zoom folks. Again, my apologies. So I am going to try a few examples to hopefully illustrate some of the points that I was making earlier. And then we could also, again, consider things from the student's perspective. This is the example research question that I had used in all three of those tools, ChatGPT, Copilot, and Perplexity. So in class, you were able to choose one and then try this example search. And we were going to try to identify some issues that we would want to point out to students if they were utilizing these research tools to do research on a topic such as this one. So the topic I chose, which is something that students might use in, for instance, a first-year seminar course, what are the effects of sharks' portrayal in the popular culture, and how does their portrayal impact conservation efforts? We actually use this in one of our research skills lessons for our university seminar. It's a good open-ended, high-quality, what we call a high-quality research question. It is nuanced and it is interdisciplinary in nature. Students can potentially gather sources from both media and communication and journalism to find out more about the popular culture aspects, in addition to things from a more scientific perspective, such as from biology or ecology of sharks. So I thought this was a good example to actually feed directly into an AI tool so that we could experience what it might be like from the student's perspective if you just try to do what probably seems like a fairly straightforward approach and just pop your research question as is into any of those research tools that I mentioned before. So let's take a look. So for the first example, as you can see, I have pasted that prompt directly here into ChatGPT. As I mentioned earlier, yes, ChatGPT, at least the 4.0 version, will provide citation links within the text of its response. As you can see, it's provided me several right here. This is important because I also included that clearly in my prompt. Please provide accurate citations, a list of sources, etc. So when prompted, ChatGPT, like many moderative generative AI tools, will provide links to external sources for us. But now let's take a look at what it's actually giving us. All right, so for this first source here from JSTOR, click on that. So just taking a quick look at this source. So this appears to be from an open access journal, Conservation Biology, from JSTOR, which, as you might know, is a well-known collection of online journals, many of which are going to be open access. By and large, this is probably going to be a fairly decent source that it's providing us with. It is from 2013, so it may or may not be as current as we might want, although I did not include a date range in my prompt. Interestingly enough, I know from experience, again, because I've used this research question for training purposes before, if you were to jump on Google Scholar and just, a basic keyword search, sharks, popular culture, conservation, news, this is actually one of the top results that you're going to get. So I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's a little bit unclear, how the AI tool you're using is choosing the quote-unquote best sources that it's giving you. I think there's basically 3 altogether that it gave me in the text of this prompt. Just keep in mind, as I might remind students, a lot of these are going to be open access sources that you could probably come across from a variety of ways. All right, let's look at the second source, Wikipedia. All right, so again, that's opening directly onto a Wikipedia page. I did ask it to include scholarly sources, scholarly and peer-reviewed articles if available. I've noticed that ChatGPT, when you're utilizing it for resource, tends to lean heavily into Wikipedia sources. Again, I know from the point of view of librarians and, as we're teaching students for doing research, Wikipedia can be a great place to start out with research. It is definitely not a primary source. It's not necessarily something that you want to rely on as a source in your final project. It's great for doing background research, basically. It will be a tertiary source rather than primary source. Again, these are the things that I might point out to students if I was working with them. This could be a way to get us started, but again, this is just giving us a snapshot into basically a couple of sources that ChatGPT found for us. All right, so let's go to the next example, which is in Copilot. All right, so this is Copilot Chat from my 365 account, exact same prompts. And we'll take a look at a couple of these here. So if I look at it, most of this is coming from, or at least for the top two paragraphs, this source number one. Looks like we have, 3 sources altogether. So if I take a look at the first one, one thing I want to point out, and I did find this earlier, now I had asked it for scholarly and peer-reviewed sources. This appears to be somebody's thesis, which, you could get to out there on the web. So as I mentioned earlier, it's hard. There's some kind of this black box aspect when you're using at least the free versions of these tools. Again, you're not sure what criteria they're using to actually track down, what the best sources are. This gave me as the very first source on its list somebody's thesis, which would not be peer reviewed, may or may not be a good source of information. I guess potentially you could look through this and find out which sources it's citing. But again, as part of an overall efficient research strategy, this source right here would be problematic. So again, these are the kind of things that I would want to point out to students as I was, if I were demonstrating this tool to them. And for my third example in Perplexity, which is again one of the more well advertised AI tools out there that's supposed to be very helpful for doing academic research. As we could see, it gave us a fairly comprehensive answer, breaks it down by some important topics and subheadings here, gives us a links to various sources that's providing for us. If we take a look at one, so if I click on this first source here, which is located under the heading for animated films and stereotypes, gives us the example of a couple of Disney movies and basically how sharks are portrayed as those. As monsters or addicts. I might, again, these are things that I would want to follow up on if I were doing research on this topic. And one way that these AI tools can potentially be helpful is, yes, it's giving me this nice little, either a summary or basically some snippets of useful information there to come from that source. Hopefully to give me an overall idea of how relevant that source is. Now I could click on it and hopefully access the full text, which, yes, I was able to do. And we find this looks like somebody's research article. It is published in a journal, Critical Approaches to Discourse Analysis, which should be easy to verify if that's indeed peer-reviewed. It's from 2013, which is probably okay. We might be able to find things that are a little bit more current, although I did not include a date range for this example. It's a little bit on the long side. Looks like overall this could be a good, useful, relevant article for somebody doing research. A little bit on the long side. I only mention that because we know from experience that students aren't necessarily always selecting or going after the longest sources. But again, that's one way that AI might potentially be able to help, is to give us an idea of how that article, that source, is actually relevant to our purpose. So for the next one here, I want to point out again a couple of things I think are one not good example, and one what I think is a very good example. All right, so for this piece of information here, over 96% of shark-themed films, including Jaws and its successors, frame sharks as threat to humans. All right, so now that is a piece of information that I would probably want to know more about, again, if I were doing research on this topic. It appears that it gave me 2 source links, which I find slightly confusing. If I wanted to find out, again, where this information is coming from, hopefully I could find out maybe a primary source, like a piece of research that actually supports that, because again, that looks like it could be an important piece of information for me. If I click on link number 2. All right, we'll let that load. All right, so now this honestly looks like it's a little bit disappointing because it's a very short article. Now it appears that, yes, so the 96% is coming out of this source right here. Looks like this is basically a summary of some research that has been done. Good thing is if I click on now this hyperlink, Human Dimensions of Wildlife. So again, I've had to click on a couple things. Now it looks like it's bringing me to the original, what appears to be a primary source, a research study that was done, which would ideally could be used to support that 96% and give me an overall idea of where that information is actually coming from. So again, I think this is very good, and also kind of highlights one of the common limitations you might come across when utilizing these tools. Again, it's effectively giving me like summaries of important pieces of information from all these sources, kind of gathering it in one spot for me. But then it really comes down to, again, as I'm selecting which sources I might want to use, then I would ideally want to verify, again, it's giving me a good piece of information here, but actually track that information down to the source, which has always been the case, as we're teaching students to do research. We encourage them to find the primary sources, the research studies and the other primary sources. And we know that's not always something that is going to be clear or intuitive, especially when people are just starting out and learning research. Now let's take a look at one more source. Again, there were two sources that seem to be supporting this piece of information that we're given here from Perplexity. I clicked on the first one, and that eventually led me to what I think is a very good source, although I had to kind of follow it through. What this is directly linking to eventually led to this one here, which is inside of the Taylor and Francis library database also, interestingly, because I often use that library database as an example of a good place to search in order to get information on this specific topic. Now if I click on the second link, so this brings me to actually what is not a journal article. Looks like this is actually a short web page that is published on an organization website. It might have some good information. It's very short. Would obviously not be a primary source, and ideally we would want to find out a little bit more of what this organization is that's sponsoring the content. Oh, and one other quick mention, regardless of maybe there is good information in this source, it's important to note that this 96% actually does not appear at all in this document. So it's not actually supporting the sentence that this was included in as a citation. So again, that does happen occasionally. You get sources that are linked to information in the text of the response that is not actually supporting it in any way or connected to it. So again, just to touch base with what we kind of know and are familiar with as far as the student perspective, just imagine if we were to recommend using these tools or basically any AI research tool, to consider what we already kind of know just from our experience working with students. And I'm sure for you librarians and educators, I love working with students. I know they pick things up very quickly when it comes to searching in library databases, evaluating sources. Nonetheless, we know based on self-reported surveys that we send out on digital information literacy and basically just from these results of research assignments, especially towards the beginning, they could be much less confident with determining if a source is credible, authoritative, might be unfamiliar with the process of tracing information back to its original source. And it's worth noting that that those are areas that are still important, even if you are using an AI research tool. And we also know from our experience with past research assignments, for many years now, Google has been their bestie for research, and I'm sure that still hasn't changed. And as I've often reminded students, librarians are not anti-Google. We never have been, or anti-Wikipedia. But it's good to remember that you aren't always going to find the exact answer to every research question or research need that you have right there on the first page of Google results, in the very first search that you do. Sometimes it takes some persistence, some creativity to track down the information that you really need. And that's especially the case when it comes to higher level academic research. So now we have on the scene all these various AI research tools, and I'm sure there's going to be more and more all the time, and they're probably going to improve in various ways as well. And this is all great. We know our students are going to use AI tools for various reasons, including for doing research, regardless of whether it's not included in the curriculum or what our overall policies are. Yes, we know they're going to be used, and we know that they can be tremendous benefit to us. Potentially in some ways. In fact, you might always say, but yes, we're cautioning in all these various ways against the ways that the information it gives us might be inaccurate or go wrong. But you might ask, we already use it all the time, don't we? When I did this presentation live during the symposium, I had a little poll so that we could all answer, the various tasks that we might do on a daily basis to use AI. That was really just to make the point that yes, we and I'm sure students and in many workplaces are going to be using AI for various tasks where it's just a huge help to be able to help us condense a lot of information together. One quick example I could give, other day I needed help doing something in Canvas LMS, exporting something from the gradebook. I wanted certain columns, not others. I typed a quick question into ChatGPT, but I did ask it to refer me to the actual source on the Canvas library guide, Canvas instructor guide rather. Because I want to be able to verify it. Now that's an example of something that you might consider a low stakes query where I understood that the information was out there, but rather than having to read through a bunch of complicated software documentation myself and put all the pieces together, I was able to kind of ask ChatGPT to put that all together. Just kind of grab that information from the web, put it all together for me, and point me to the correct sources for that information. So basically, you could say that AI research tools are giving us some very good advantages, and that they support natural language searching and iterative natural language searching. Many of the same issues apply now as they always do. However, when it comes to actually evaluating the sources of information, is it current? Is it reliable? Is it authoritative? Is it suitable for our purpose? Is it just an excerpt from a news article as opposed from a primary source? These are all questions that still apply. And on top of that is the added question that now is that if you're relying on the prompt of the AI, or rather the response of the AI text itself for your information, you have to think, is that even something that I can verify with the source? On top of whether or not that source is a good quality, reliable source, is it actually supporting the answer that the AI search tool is giving me, which is the next topic that I wanted to go into. We tend to have an intuitive understanding of whether something is higher stakes or lower stakes. And in the research literature that I've been reading through, where they've actually surveyed users who are very experienced with online searching, both in web search and as well as using AI tools, the overwhelming responses are that users tend to prefer using AI tools when it's a lower stakes example. Many different examples, creative examples, brainstorming, how to, condensing, practical steps for doing something, maybe in a piece of software, where verifiability is not unimportant, but it might, first of all, be easier to do, and it might not necessarily be as crucial. If I'm asking MS Copilot or ChatGPT for advice on how to do something in Canvas, it could break down those steps, maybe pull it out of the documentation from the website. And yes, I could go out and verify it if need be, but it's kind of condensing all that information down to me in a form that's easier for me to use. Likewise, for doing research, for those examples I just showed, I could ask it to suggest keywords for me. I could have it help me formulate a research question based on a topic. I could have it give me subtopic ideas, versions of a question. Again, narrowing or refining a topic. Maybe it's a little bit too broad, a little bit too narrow. Those are examples where it's not purely creative, because obviously it's tied to real-world information that should be verified at some point. But again, that verification process at that point is not yet as crucial as it might be a little bit further on in the research process. Higher stakes examples are exactly what you might think of: medical information, legal information. Yes, as I understand, there are some specialized AI tools that are used for those purposes, but again, those are very highly specialized. And of course, you still need to have very good verification in order to actually make sure they're getting good quality information. I know there's famous examples where lawyers have actually used ChatGPT, for example, to cite legal cases that it turned out were complete fabrications. It was just a hallucination, and they ended up citing a fake legal case. That happens from time to time. You hear about that on the news. Likewise with academic research. Again, for our purposes, and also as we're working with students who are learning academic research, we're stepping them through the process and getting them to understand that yes, this is very high stakes, because ultimately we're all expected to use sources ethically, to find the best quality sources, to understand that scholarship is a conversation, and that different points of view might exist. And one article might have a different point of view from another, and it helps to be able to retrieve different sources and to be able to evaluate the quality of those sources. So now this is another example that I'm going to try. So as we know, when you're starting off doing research, you're not necessarily going to have a well-formulated, high-quality research question. We know that formulating a research question and getting a general idea of what your topic is and related subtopics are part of the overall research. And one of the great advantages that AI tools can give us is the fact that they support not only natural language searching, but what I might call conversational searching. All right, and again, we could work with it iteratively. So let's just say, in this example, I'm telling what my role is. I'm a college student. I want to do research on sharks in the popular culture. All right, so I had that much identified. There's sharks, which is a very broad topic. on their sharks' portrayal in the popular culture. I'm sure there's a lot of information on that, how they're portrayed on TV, movies, media, the news media, etc. If I can take a quick look and scroll down here, it's giving me exactly what I asked it for in my prompts. What are some possible related topics and research questions? And of course, I could follow up on this easily enough because, again, it's supporting iterative conversational searching. I did not ask it for any sources right now, so it's always possible with any AI tool that it could be hallucinating. It could give me something that's really off the wall here and talk about, let's say, this is talking about Jaws from 1975. If it gave me something from, let's say, 1775, that would be an obvious hallucination. But as I mentioned, the verifiability issue when you're early on like this, may not be quite as crucial. Now, the next step is I can also ask an AI directly for sources. So for this next search prompt, I was very clear that I'm asking it now for a list of references. Hopefully they will give them to me in APA format with as many as 10 specific sources if available. I've noticed when I've tried variations of this and asked it for a specific number of sources, it's hit or miss. Sometimes it'll give me that number, sometimes it won't. I guess maybe sometimes there's not enough sources available that it finds. I'm not sure, but just keep in mind, it will vary when you ask it for a specific date range. When you ask it for a specific number of sources, its compliance will vary. But in this case, I'm asking it to provide an actual list of peer-reviewed research based on this topic. In this case, this would be the first example topic that it gave me, the impact of shark movies on the perception of sharks. And it gave me a list down here. I did ask it to provide me with links out on the web if they were available. Now, in the past, you may or may not be familiar that ChatGPT and other AI tools have been notorious not only for hallucinating, but sometimes for hallucinating when you ask them for references. In the past, there were cases where we would ask ChatGPT to provide, a list of books or ebooks on a topic or journal articles. People have found that it can even hallucinate, fake articles, give you fake authors with a real title or vice versa. All right, so if we could just take a quick look here, as I mentioned, even though I was very specific about things like number of sources and date range, yes, in ChatGPT and basically any AI research tool that I've tested this kind of prompt with, it'll vary in what it complies. I think these are probably good sources. They are at least real sources that it's provided me with the links. It only gave me 5. That's okay. Like I said, that's going to tend to happen. I said up to 10. Notice the dates. This one's from 2016. I did ask from the previous 5 years. That's another thing that is kind of hit or miss with. And this is actually one good distinction between this and searching in a database, for example, or even on Google Scholar that I would point out to students. Remember, when you're doing your searching in a database, a discovery system, etc., you could always very cleanly and reliably sort by date. If I want things only in the previous 5 years, I could do that easily enough. If I want to focus on a specific source type, if I really want to know that everything is a journal article, for example, I could filter by journal article or a news article. Those are the types of tools that are available in a more conventional search. But that's not to say that this can't also be helpful. Like I said, in context, one of the main things that it's helping us with is, again, this could be basically like an iterative brainstorming session that goes more and more in depth. Now I'm solidifying my ideas, crystallizing, my research topic in question. Now I can focus on specific things, and I could prompt it now for specific articles that it's going to give me, which can be, a very good, effective starting point for research. But it's still not the end, because what I could do now, I could even ask it for advice if I wanted to continue my research on how I can find other sources and articles related to these. And now I'm asking it for a list of keywords in order to find related articles and topics. Again, this is all information that could be very helpful, and it is gathered for me, pretty efficiently. So here I am now back in Perplexity, and again, this was my original prompt, same one that I put into ChatGPT. And again, here was my response. Remember, I had examined a couple of these sources. A couple were okay. It wasn't always obvious how they were connecting to the answer that it gave me. Potentially some good sources in here. Now further down, all right, so I switched my strategy a little bit here. So I'm now asking it specifically to provide me with sources and giving it, more of a specific topic here. Sources that discuss sharks being portrayed as monsters or addicts in movies and media. So you'll remember from one of these top paragraphs here, we found this one source. Looked like it was a pretty good quality research article that was published. So let's say if I wanted to follow up on this, I find it relevant to my research, and I definitely want to find some related information, maybe to also verify the other information that I'm getting about that one article. So now it's giving me a list of sources down here, again similar to like the other tools. It will hopefully provide me with a link if available. Looks like these are all document object numbers. They'll probably take me directly to the source, so I can at least verify that they are credible, that they are relevant to what I'm looking for, and suitable for my purpose. Now let's take a moment to consider some verifiability and accuracy issues common to so-called answer engine AI tools. Answer engines are tools that basically combine language generation functionality with retrieval augmented generation functionality, or RAG, which you might have heard of. I'm hoping this brief discussion will shed some light on why relying directly on the information these tools generate for us based on those sources can be problematic, as opposed to prompting these tools specifically to provide us with a set of sources or a list of references to relevant sources on a given topic, which is what I did in my later examples. And we can then look into those sources it retrieved ourselves to evaluate the suitability and overall quality of those sources, preserving our independence in the source selection for more higher stakes information needs. So in those first examples that I had done at the very beginning, I fed an open-ended research question directly in as a prompt. Now in that case, the AI is likely to give me a more general explanation of that research question, making a few key points about it, and then it's basically free to frame its response around a small set of sources that it's free to choose. This information search strategy opens up two potential problems. The first is that the search and selection process is going to be rather opaque to us in terms of how it's identified the most relevant and suitable sources. Now, this is one area where so-called deep research features, which are premium features in some AI tools, can potentially be an improvement, as these features are supposed to make the search and selection process a little more transparent. But again, the examples that I'm showing you are done using the free versions of these tools, which are available as of this recording in February 2025. The second issue is that those few sources that the AI does use can be used inaccurately or imprecisely in the generated answer text. And these issues are going to potentially be present regardless of whether you're using premium deep research or not. That's if you're relying on the AI generated text primarily for your information. Those first AI search examples that I used at the beginning are actually going to be a good illustration of some of these accuracy and verifiability problems that are plaguing basically all RAG tools currently. I'm going to show you some examples of inaccurate or imprecise citations momentarily. It is worth noting that these are limitations of these AI RAG tools that will likely persist for a long time, and again are almost certainly going to be common throughout any tools that exist today. And I'm going to highlight a couple of important articles that I came across. There's a lot out there if you want to look into it, and you'll have my list of references with the slides that I'm sending out. So for the first research study, evaluating verifiability in generative search engines. So this was back in 2023. This is a fairly well-known study in the field of data science. You might say that even from 2023, this is a little bit of an older research, just given that AI is moving so fast. What I'm saying now, 6 months from now, things could be different. Even a very short amount of time. Things are taking giant leaps forward, it seems. But it's safe to say that the underlying issues when it comes to having accurate citations that the AI tool is giving you, by citation again, I mean those source links that it is giving you inside of its response, whether or not the text of that source actually always accurately supports the information that the AI tool is giving you, right? Which is what this study was meant to measure. Is still not going to be 100%. So these numbers right here, this could vary by the specific tool that's being measured. It could be different, today. Maybe things have gotten a little bit better. It's safe to say that it's still not always going to be 100% and probably won't be for some time. So in this study, 4 tools were evaluated. These 4 were the big ones that were available then. There's many more available now. Like I said, ChatGPT is now an RAG tool, so that could be considered, an answer tool, similarly to Perplexity AI or any of these others, because it's providing you links to sources in its text. but these were the 4 that existed at that time. So 1,450 queries were tested in each tool, and those were randomly selected, real queries that were used by real users and various subjects, and those were evaluated by humans that actually judged how well the text of the AI answer was supported by the sources. I'll just give you the very condensed version. I invite you to read up on some of these research studies if you want to find out more about the methodology. But basically, only roughly half of the statements that really should have had a citation were actually linked to an outside source, enabling you to verify it. All right, and the other issue was that 74, as it's telling you here, 74.5% of the citations were precise. So if I could just jump back momentarily into one of the prompts that I had done earlier for this one in ChatGPT, an example of something that you might consider to be a citation link that is not very precise. For example, this third source here, this is discussing positive media representations can enhance public attitudes towards sharks. Sounds like a good statement. So if I click on the actual citation link here, all right, and it looks like I already had that open. So actually I get a fairly good, thorough article that is in turn citing much other research. All right, so this statement here, which arguably is somewhat general statement, is kind of supported in various sections throughout this one article that ChatGPT has cited for me. Social media may help reduce fear and misconceptions about sharks and promote public support for their conservation. All right, fairly, and this might be fairly good to follow up on. Just keep in mind, so this article has in itself cited many other pieces of research that have then been synthesized by these authors in order to support their findings, and then eventually, ChatGPT in this case has kind of abstracted some of those statements out about positive media representations, social media, and kind of extracted this neat little answer for me, which might be helpful. And it's giving me this one source again, but having to actually go through and verify exactly where that information came from in the source article. That I think would be an example of a citation that, while potentially helpful, and yes, it is pointing me towards where it got that information from, but it still takes a little bit of work for me to go in and actually verify it. It would not be considered to be a very precise citation. And now switching over to my Perplexity example, again, basically the same research prompt. Some of the same issues will crop up again, when it comes to the basic functionality of retrieval augmented generation tools such as these and many others. Again, they're going to share a lot of the same limitations, even though they might be drawing on a different set of sources. Although in this case, I did notice that at least one source is the same. This frontier source that I got from ChatGPT is actually the same one in Perplexity that's giving me for the number 6 source, I believe. And giving me a similar piece of information. Research indicates that positively framed media, such as documentaries highlighting shark behavior and ecological roles, can reduce fear and foster support for conservation. It's actually using that as one of the exact same source in order to back up that claim. Another thing I've noticed about Perplexity, again, it does give you these multiple links after sentences. I find that to be slightly confusing. And again, if I was actually wanting to go out and verify where some of this information is coming from, again, I would argue that this also makes it less precise because it's giving me now multiple citations for literally the same piece of text, and it's not always clear exactly where it's coming from. And last but not least, MS Copilot Chat, which I had also used earlier, again, with this exact same prompt. It had provided me with I think 3 different sources. And this is where we found that the first source was actually not even really technically a journal article, but somebody's unpublished thesis statement that had been posted to the web. There were a couple of other sources that it provided me with. This number 2 source is actually, once again, this exact same one that we had seen with both ChatGPT and Perplexity. It's being used in a similar way, supporting the concept that negatively framed content exacerbates fear and supports lethal measures against sharks. Okay, well, okay, that's sounds good. So this third statement, or this third source down here, now we're getting into support for conservation. This support can be bolstered by educational and positive media representations that highlight the ecological importance of sharks. All right, so if I click on source number 3 and see what it gives us, I find, looks like this is actually not open access. It might be looks like it's behind a paywall. I'm not getting the full text. I am getting the abstract. So it might well be that it's literally just pulling that particular piece of information out of the abstract. That I think basically that the public is still, there's still a significant level of public support for shark conservation. All right, so now this is where it can get to be problematic because it's telling me that there is significant support for conservation. So presumably this next sentence will support that claim in some way. This support can be bolstered by educational, positive media representations. All right, so does that mean that there's still a significant level of public support for shark conservation? You know, this is where you get into, all right, so what is actually in this source article that's supporting that? It looks like this might only be coming out of the abstract, but this is saying that findings reported herein indicate direct media influence on respondent perceptions. All right, now interestingly enough, it's also telling me further down that there is less fear among people aged 20 to 40 years, but they're being separated into two groups. So it looks like, as far as the older respondents are concerned, older respondents lived in a period with less environmental information, with less environmental information, and became more susceptible to shark negative films and media, which fear still persists today. So the only thing I would bring up, you know, again, I would have to read that article a bit more thoroughly, but the important thing is that it's unclear whether or not Copilot also has full access to that article. It might have just pulled out pieces from the abstract that seemed to support the claims that, you know, it wanted to give me in response to my prompt. It's saying, you know, flat out, there's still a significant level of public support for shark conservation. It's really not giving me anything specific in order to back that up. So I would say that is both a not accurate source that it's giving me, and it's also not a very precise source. It might even be reflecting just what it thinks I want to hear in my response. Okay, I'm looking for people that support shark conservation, so it kind of selectively pulled out from that one abstract. Okay, look, you know, this group supports it, and now it just gives me this general statement about how just people, you know, there's still a significant level of public support for shark conservation. So all this is to say that the devil can definitely be in the details, and it pays to be attentive with how the AI tools are actually using the sources for their information that it gives you. So to summarize, so this very well-known research study, in addition to the problems they have with not all statements being supported that should have been, and we just saw an example of that in MS Copilot. And also a good number of the citations given were not precise citations. It also measured the fluency and utility, that is to say how useful that people would find the response. And again, I have to say it's not too surprising, but the most helpful responses also tended to have the least precise citations. Right? So just think about, you know, an example where you have a lot of very technical and complex information that's kind of condensed down in a way that's, you know, easier to understand, a little bit more bite-sized piece. And this could be very helpful. Just keep in mind, a lot of times, you know, that bite-sized piece of information may now be in fluent language that is easier to understand than the original source, but it's also probably highly paraphrased from parts of that source, from the source's text, where it can be taken out of context. Now, an example of that is like ChatGPT's statement that we just saw, where it says basically social media is currently being used for a specific purpose to, you know, educate the public about sharks, for example. Whereas the main idea of the source where it took that from, one of the main ideas was that social media was actually being underutilized for that purpose, as compared to the more common negative portrayals of sharks on social media, which that source also discussed in depth. And the generated statements can also change a few of the important words, which can significantly alter the meaning of the original source text, such as basically saying that social media is currently being used in a certain way, rather than it can potentially be used in that way. Now that's an example of an imprecise source citation in the generated text. There's also examples where, to make our answers a little more user-friendly as compared to the source text, the generated text is highly abstracted from the source, which means basically that the language has been condensed and altered significantly from the original source text. This might make it more understandable and approachable, but this again opens up the possibility that the generated text is now no longer accurately supported by the source, which brings us to our next study. Extractive abstractive spectrum. All right, this is a little bit more recent, from 2024. All right, so just to give a quick overview, and again, I invite everyone to go out and, you know, review the actual case studies themselves. I think this was very well done research. It is open access. The links and the references are going to be in the list of references I have on my slides. So the abstractive spectrum, let me briefly describe. Extractive would be basically just extracting a piece of text as is from an information source and providing that as your answer. Abstractive will be way on the other end of the spectrum, where it's kind of condensing down, many pieces of text and information from a source and kind of digesting it and providing me with a little bit more of like a bite-sized chunk that's, as it says, abstracted out of the original source text. An example might be, in any of those where we found one or two sentences such as, positive social media can positively help shark conservation by influencing, positive media views of sharks. I'm just, I'm roughly paraphrasing here, but like in the, some of the statements that were made earlier that we saw that cited, one or two of the source articles, that would be considered, somewhat of an abstract, vague statement that was made based on many pieces of information that were inside of that source document. All right, so that would be an example of an abstract answer that the AI is giving me, as opposed to something that's more extractive, where it's taking the source more or less as is, maybe modifying it, but not making too many changes to it. What they found was that, and this tested 450 test queries, and this did use ChatGPT 4.0, and they found that, again, as the output of those answers to the prompts became more abstract, the perceived utility tended to increase while the verifiability decreases. And we also saw that where it's making some pretty bold general statements such as, people now still largely support shark conservation, like we just saw in MS Copilot, for example. Probably similar examples you could find in the other two. Sounds very authoritative the way that the AI says it. The verifiability, on the other hand, is very difficult because, again, it's only giving us that one source. And then, as we saw, it could be problematic to see exactly where and how that source is actually supporting the claim that the AI is making. Also, in this research study, this provided the result of a user survey of 200 regular AI users. And they, again, not too surprisingly, and these were all experienced AI users, overwhelmingly preferred using search engines, in order to find information for what they consider to be high stakes queries, like I mentioned earlier, medical or legal information. They want to be able to actually go out there and pick their sources themselves and read through the actual source documents in order to evaluate where their information is coming from when it's a high stakes search, as opposed to, again, people largely prefer AI for low stakes searches. Most of our everyday usage of AI, I would say, is probably very low stakes because verifiability, it's still important, but it's not necessarily as crucial, and that comes into play when you want to have, a bunch of complex information kind of condensed down to you in more bite-sized chunks, like providing a practical, how to step-by-step, for example, if you're looking at how to use a piece of software where, that's pretty low stakes because I don't necessarily have to verify it right away, and it becomes, the utility of those types of responses that it's giving you is very high, and again, the verifiability is not as crucial. All right, and just the third one I want to briefly mention. So this actually surveyed 21 experts in various academic fields. These were the tools that it used, UChat, Bing Copilot, Perplexity AI. Again, it used those because those were well known for being able to give you sources and links to external documents, although as we know now, again, various AI tools will also do so. And again, not terribly surprising. It was found that among experts in their field, they were fairly dissatisfied with the AI answers that they were getting when it came to asking questions related to their field. They were, expressed dissatisfaction with not knowing how sources were selected. Again, it's always a little bit problematic when you know that there's many different sources that are available for a topic, and they all seem to be giving you that one source. There's that one article that all three AI tools were giving us. There were a few others that were very problematic, and it makes you wonder, how is it that what are they actually using to select the sources of information that it's giving to us? And that's something that all users in the study expressed dissatisfaction over. All of them wanted to retain their independence. And when they were using search engine results, they tended to click more sources and wanted to explore a lot more of where their information was coming from, as opposed to wanting to rely on just the sources that the AI tools were giving them. So just to quickly summarize a few other potential and important AI research issues. Yes, various AI tools, including ChatGPT, now are connected to the internet where it can pull up sources for us. But nonetheless, it could be unclear of how often those sources are being brought in and periodically refreshed, if you will, or whether or not there's a caching mechanism so that it's not having to constantly go out there and search for every single prompt that we use. It could be unclear whether every current topic in the news, for example, it's going to be able to provide information for us. And I've noticed also in our informal survey that we did in class during the workshop and the symposium that yes, almost all respondents were saying that they used AI tools almost every day for various purposes, such as work related, such as just gathering just everyday information. But the lowest that people would use AI research tools for, at least in our informal study, was for gathering news topics. Again, with anything that is, it's very crucial to have the most current information. That could be an area where using AI is problematic. Again, some AI tools, I believe to some extent the free version of Perplexity, and also I believe Google Gemini. I'm not sure about ChatGPT, but I believe also Google Gemini. Again, the free version is largely relying on Google Scholar somewhere on the back end in order to gather its results. So some of the same limitations are going to apply. For those of you who are familiar with using Google Scholar for research, it's known that it will tend to skew results, or it's been observed many times that it will tend to skew results to more open access sources as opposed to paid access. It will bring up some paid access sources. And I've noticed that, there were one or two sources that AI was giving us that were behind a firewall where it's unclear whether or not it's being able to draw its information from the content that's behind its paywall. Some news sites are actually actively preventing AI from utilizing information from their websites, including even free content on their websites. So this is something that is being, as I understand, actively litigated currently in the courts. A lot of publishers, magazine publishers, newspaper publishers are taking steps to try and prevent how much these various AI tools can access their content, both their not just their paid content, but also their free content. They obviously depend on viewers coming to their websites and reading their articles in order to bring in revenue. That's part of their business model. And to an extent, when something like Perplexity AI steps into the picture and it could just pull out bits and pieces of a news article, and so that users aren't even necessarily going to be bothered going to visit the news website anymore, that could be problematic for them. And as I understand, very recently, I think it was Forbes magazine actually sent a cease and desist letter over to Perplexity threatening a lawsuit unless Perplexity basically stopped using its various web crawler programs in order to use information from their website. And I think that's currently ongoing, and I'm kind of curious to see how that turns out, if that indeed goes to court. All right, and again, as I mentioned earlier, even when you're asking AI to provide a list of references, as we did in our later examples, make sure you check every reference, ask for a link if it's available. Again, even references can potentially be hallucination. I believe that this is less of a problem than it once was. Nonetheless, it's good to double check all of the sources that it is giving you. So last and not least, again, tying this all back into the student's perspective, during the workshop and at the symposium, I had a couple of interactive activities that we had tried out. Some of them didn't work too well due to technical glitches that we encountered. But basically, what I wanted to do is just kind of simulate activity ideas that could be presented to students in class in order to kind of guide them through some of the issues that we understand about how AI tools can be helpful and what some of the potential limitations are. Again, some of what we discovered might seem a little bit more clear to folks such as librarians and educators like us who have been doing academic research for a while, and we are kind of aware of what things to look for when it comes to how various claims are supported, what sources are being given, what information in that source really accurately backs up a specific claim. For students, again, who are just learning research, they might be still getting the hang of whether or not something is peer-reviewed, what kind of, whether something is a government report, whether it's a peer-reviewed journal, whether it's a news article, evaluating what the source type is, evaluating what the relevance and the suitability of a source is. They're still kind of getting a hang of all that, in addition to now the concept of having to, if you're utilizing AI for research, actually also verifying whether or not the information that's giving you can even be accurately tied to an outside source. and then evaluating, the quality of what that outside source is. So all that is to say that the in-class activities were basically meant to just have us kind of brainstorm, if you will, various ways that we could present these same issues to students, such as with building in-class activities. So for this recording, what I wanted to do is show a couple of example activities that I created. This is just my Canvas sandbox. Ultimately, these are going to be shared publicly on the I Know faculty guide, which is available from the Mary and Jeff Bell website. All right, and I could provide a link to that as well. All right, so these are some of the activity ideas. A Canvas stimulus quiz, which I have here, I will show you. All right, a stimulus quiz. If you're familiar with Canvas new quizzes, all right, and if you're not using Canvas, I think almost any LMS has something that's equivalent. You could use basically anything as your stimulus. It could be a multimedia, it could be an image. In this case, what I did was I copy and pasted the exact text from an AI response, basically almost the same prompts that I'd used in the very beginning as an example for my sharks and popular culture research topic. I took all of that text and I pasted it as into a Canvas stimulus quiz. All right, and this will even preserve the hyperlinks. All right, so all these hyperlink numbers. All right, and I'm sorry, this was actually a different research topic. I was doing environmental and economic effects of climate change on the Gulf Coast. All right, but whatever topic would fit the most into your subject and curriculum, you could create something just like this. Copy and paste the entire text of the AI response. The hyperlinks will be preserved, although the students won't necessarily need to follow the hyperlinks because then they would have to navigate away from the quiz. But then you could ask follow-up questions to that stimulus. For example, out of the 9 sources given at the end, 5 were linked in the response text. All right, so out of all this whole list here, what sources were actually used? All right, that's question number 1. For question number 2, I actually added one of the sources. It turned out to be a very short news article that was the very first source given. This is in Perplexity. It was a very short news article. I actually went ahead and created a PDF of that online news article, and I added it to Canvas as a course document, and I added that as a question. All right, so these are all the various ways that you could have, present some of these issues to students, when you are guiding them through comparing what the AI information is versus the outside source that it's linking to, the various issues that we've encountered. You could test out your own example prompts that make sense for your learners in your class, and you could create something just like this. In this case, I use the Canvas quiz, and in this case, they get firsthand experience evaluating sources that are used in a real AI prompt without actually having to utilize that AI tool. Because again, I know one of the open questions is, to what extent are we actually going to require students to use AI in class? And there's many different ways that you could share the text of an AI prompt in Canvas, such as here in a stimulus quiz, without actually requiring the students to have to go out and utilize or access that tool directly in order to complete an activity. All right, and then I have a couple of follow-up activities to that quiz. This is just a regular, like a Canvas, like an upload assignment. Basically taking that same research question and prompt and then comparing, if they were utilizing, let's say, Quick Search, that's our library discovery system, or a Google Scholar, and then they could do a quick comparison. Okay, so those were the AI prompts that were related to that research topic and research question. Now, let's say if they were utilizing a more conventional search like Google Scholar or Quick Search, and then they could kind of compare, side by side what those results are. And, I added basically a reflection question at the end so that they can explain, well, these are the ways that AI might be helpful and useful. These are the ways that, library search engine might be useful, and kind of give an overall comparison of the two. And lastly, another activity that I had created as a prototype. In this activity, I'm doing something similar to what I did during my examples that I just showed you, where I'm doing a couple of different prompts that are related to the same research topic. All right, so for my first set of prompts, we did an open-ended research question. All right, so that's similarly to what we had done, with my very first response or queries, what are the effects of sharks in popular culture, basically giving the AI an open-ended response. And we saw that, that opens up a whole can of, it's going to kind of go out there and gather, many different things, because I'm not giving it too much guidance on specifically what I'm looking for. as opposed to a secondary follow-up prompt could be something that's a little bit more structured, such as in the second example that I had showed you, where I'm now asking it to provide specifically a summary of scholarly and peer-reviewed research published in the last 5 years. And again, this is just to show, as my example did earlier, now that you're giving it a little bit more of a structured prompt, and now I'm not asking it directly for open-ended information, but now I'm giving it a topic that I'm looking for information on, and to provide me with actual scholarly peer-reviewed sources in relation to that topic. And also, it will also explain how it's relevant to that topic. All right, and this will just kind of introduce them to some of the other issues that might crop up. I'm asking it for 10, maybe it only gives me 5 or whatever. I've yet to ask an AI tool for 10 sources and it gives me exactly 10. It's always a different number. I've yet to ask it for, I want only scholarly peer-reviewed research, and then it actually gives me only scholarly peer-reviewed research in all the times I've tested it out. And I've yet to ask an AI tool, can you please give me only information that's published within the past 5 years or 10 years, and it actually accurately does that. It will provide some very good information, and yes, it's very efficient and powerful at doing research and retrieving those articles for me. Just keep in mind, it's not going to be as precise or reliable as when I'm doing something in a library database, and I could actually, filter by the last 10 years. I could actually filter by exactly what the source type is. Is it peer-reviewed or is it something else? And these activities are just ways to kind of step students through those different types of issues that they might encounter when doing their research. Again, thank you for all who attended the Digital Information Literacy Symposium sponsored by the Mary and Jeff Bell Library. I apologize again for all of the technical issues that we were having. So this has been a re-recording of the I Know Evaluating AI Research Tools for Verifiability workshop. Again, my name is Eric Casio. Any of you are always welcome to reach out if you have any questions about the presentation or just want to correspond a little bit about the very large and ever-growing topic of utilizing AI tools for academic research. Thank you.